Welcome His Excellency Dr. Alexander Stubb, who is the President of the Republic of Finland. He is being welcomed by Shri B. Venugopal Reddy, who is the Additional Chief Secretary of Higher and Technical Education Department of the Government of Maharashtra, and also Professor Dr. Ravindra Kulkarni, who is the Vice-Chancellor. In a traditional Indian way, the lamp is being lit right now by all the dignitaries. If I may now request the Honorable President, and Dr. Kulkarni to please come on stage. Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, here's the President of the world's happiest country in a country of the most optimistic people, to borrow your words. Thank you so much. I now request Dr. Kulkarni to felicitate His Excellency Dr. Alexander Stubb. What's being gifted to the President is a model of Rajabai Tower, which is an iconic location in Mumbai. This is a small token of love from the University for the Honorable President of Finland. Thank you so much. I now invite Professor Dr. Ravindra Kulkarni, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Mumbai, to deliver his welcome address.
Good morning to all of you. It is really a matter of pleasure and for me, on behalf of University of Mumbai, to extend heartiest welcome to His Excellency Dr. Alexander, President of the Republic of Finland. And as being rightly pointed out by our anchor, it is one of the topmost happiest country, and that's how we are looking forward to his talk on rebalancing the new world order, multilateral cooperation in the age of fragmentation. I just would like to bring some facts before our Excellency, Dr. Alexander sir. This hall where you are going to deliver a talk is one of the oldest heritage convocation hall, built in the year 1876 and completely built on the architecture Gothic. And throughout the 150 years, we have tried our level best to maintain. And as a result of that, UNESCO has upgraded this structure as a grade 1 heritage structure. And at the same time, in 2019, because of our sustained efforts in maintaining this hall, they have even given an award of Heritage Conservation Excellence Award by UNESCO in the year 2019. At this point of time, I just would like to present few things about University of Mumbai. University of Mumbai is one of the oldest and largest university of India, having established in the year 1857. So we have almost 167 years of legacy. And say one of the most important part, the Bharat Ratna, which is one of the topmost civilian award. University of Mumbai takes pride in producing 8 Bharat Ratna award who were our alumni. And at the same time, University of Mumbai has 56 departments, 18 international, 18 centers. One of them is the Center on International Relations, Geopolitics and Strategic Studies. And we are well connected to the world-class universities globally, dealing with all universities world across from US, Europe, UK, Russia, and South Asian countries, where we are working with them in terms of faculty and student exchange, as well as the dual and joint degree program, which is being run at both universities together at almost 6 different global universities. And we are working on many common research areas, some of which are very emerging, including artificial intelligence, robotics, industry Internet of Things, and process automation itself. So on behalf of University of Mumbai, I extend hearty welcome to you. I extend all the dignitaries who are here. Our Additional Chief Secretary, Venugopal Reddy, is representing Government of Maharashtra. All the, the Consulate General of Finland, Consul General of different countries, and all my Vice-Chancellors from different universities, the principals, professors from different colleges, and as well as the most important, my dear students, who are very much eager to hear you on your talk on rebalancing the new world order, multilateral cooperation in the age of fragmentation. Thanks to you for accepting the invitation and delivering a talk at this, the Heritage Hall. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kulkarni sir. I now invite His Excellency Dr. Alexander Stubb, the President of the Republic of Finland, to give his keynote speech on the rebalancing of the New World Order, multilateral cooperation in the age of fragmentation. Now, Mr. Stubb, if I may say a few words, is a well-known global leader and thinker. He's quite happy with his trip to India, especially after his reel with the Prime Minister has hit over 4 million views, sir. Oh, 12 million now, yes. So he's experiencing what kind of digital fame Indian social media has. Also, you know, his address at the Resina Dialogue, where he gave his keynote speech, gave him a lot of applause for the kind of resonance it had with India about the value-based realism that you talked about. He invoked Kautilya in his speech and talked about the similarities between India's and Finland's foreign policy. So it's a pleasure to have you, if I may invite you for your keynote speech.
Good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for your kind words in the beginning and your hospitality as well. And being here at the University of Mumbai, I think you can really feel the leaves of history upon you, especially in this beautiful building. I'm looking at the wonderful students here. You're here on a Saturday. I hope the professors paid you to come here. When I travel the world, or indeed when I travel in my country, Finland, I try to visit a university whenever I'm around, and there are many reasons for that. For me, doing my undergraduate work at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, was a life-changing experience. I didn't feel particularly academic before I started studying at university, but it changed my life, and I haven't looked back since. And I guess to all the students here today, if I can just give you one message, that is that please be curious for the rest of your lives. You're not here to learn about facts and memorize things. You're here to learn about logical and analytical thinking, which will pave the way for the rest of your life. And to all the professors that are here today, I always quote one of my favorite philosophers, Aristotle, who said that there is nothing more noble than teaching the young. I'm here in that spirit today. And what I wanted to do was to give you my assessment of where the world stands in 2026. And I will probably follow the structure of my book, which I published in English in January, called The Triangle of Power, Rebalancing the New World Order. And what I'll do is I'll just try to set the scene, and then you can grill me on the questions, much like Dr. Jehanghier and Samir Saran did yesterday at the Raisina Dialogues. What I'll do is I'll give you an introduction, 3 points, and a conclusion. to keep it all structured. By way of introduction, I want to say that I, much like all of us, am a prisoner of my own identity, which basically means that I'm born and raised in Finland, in the Nordic countries, in Europe, and got my academic grounding in the United States, Belgium, France, and the United Kingdom. The literature that has built the Substack in my brain is probably a Western literature. So please apologize. I want to apologize in advance from having a rather Western approach to my thinking about the new world order. Now, by way of introduction, I think you and I, all of us in this room, are witnessing one of the hinge moments in world politics. A little bit similar to the moment after World War I, after World War II, or in the Indian case, after independence, or the moment that we witnessed after the end of the Cold War. So it's very much a 1918, 1945, 1989 moment. And usually world orders, they last for a few decades. Sometimes we don't see when they changed, other times it's quite self-evident. But usually we use the wisdom of hindsight to figure out when it happened. So the world order after World War I lasted for 2 decades, the one after World War II lasted for 4 decades, and the one after the Cold War has now lasted for 3 decades. And my thesis today is that the world order began to change, again from a Western perspective, on the 24th of February 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine. Why then? Well, because it was probably the most blatant violation of international law that we have seen from a member of the UN Security Council since the end of World War II. It is, of course, not the only landmark. We could have started with many other dates, but that's the one I use in the book. And to be quite frank with you, it has all been accelerated because of the new US administration, which has a slightly different approach to world politics than what we are used to. My approach, which was mentioned, is one of values-based realism, where I believe that we should stay true to our values, which in my case are quite simple and straightforward. Democracy, freedom, human rights, fundamental rights, protection of minorities, equality, justice, and rule of law. But while doing that, I firmly believe that you cannot solve the world's big problems like climate change, technology, or conflicts just with people who think exactly like you or who share your values. That's why I think engagement is always the key. My final point on the introduction is to say that I think we have a fairly binary choice of the direction which the world might go. But my binary is probably too simplistic. The binary is that we can choose between a multipolar world, which is about deals, transactions, bilateral nation-state transactions, and quite often conflict and spheres of interest, a little bit like we had in the 19th century. The other choice is what I call multilateralism, and one which I have found that many of my Indian friends, including the Prime Minister of India, would support, is multilateralism. In other words, a reliance on international institutions, norms, rules, and laws. And I, of course, support this track because it gives agency and power to a small player like myself. I come from a country with only 5.6 million people, and the multilateral system, whether regional in the Nordics or regional in Europe or global in the UN, has served us quite well. So this is the setup, multipolar versus multilateral. My first point is about the order of the world. My second point is about the balance of the world. And my third point is about the dynamics of the world. As far as order is concerned, one could argue that after World War II, the world was rather bipolar. you had two ideological competitors, the Soviet Union and the United States. The Soviet Union, of course, driving an agenda of controlled economies, of interests which are more authoritarian than democratic, and also an ideology of communism. On the other side, you had the United States, which was, at least in name, driving what could be called an agenda of democracy, agenda of freedom. But there was a clear ideological battle here. And then, of course, in between, you had countries that were non-aligned, that wanted to have their own space in the world. But the world was, for all intents and purposes, bipolar. Now, when the Cold War ended, and again, remember, I look at this from a Western perspective, what happened was that the world became unipolar. It was a unipolar moment because the United States and its allies had pretty much won the Cold War, the systemic battle of which one serves us better. And what we saw at the time was a sort of, I would argue, intellectual laziness on the part of the West. I started my studies in 1989, so you can imagine being a young student, the Berlin Wall falling, the Soviet Union collapsing, us having 1,340 kilometers of border with Russia, us joining the European Union. I was sort of empowered, and I felt that this is absolutely fantastic. Finally, Finland finds its values-based place in the West. But of course, again, that was a very subjective view. But the truth was that it was the unipolar moment. We thought that everyone in the world wanted to become like us, that everyone in the world was going to convert towards liberal democracy, social market economy, and globalization. And I think that was a wrong assumption. And that is probably a wrong assumption because we all have our own cultures, we all have our own histories, and we all have our own identities, which are very rarely similar. So we failed to see the objective totality of the situation, and you could say that the 1990s was a unipolar moment. That then started to change probably somewhere around 9/11, when the United States, for security and other reasons, dropped in many ways the narrative of we are here to support and allow democratic institutions from around the world, and began to act in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere without the framework of international law. At the same time, for demographic reasons, we start seeing first the emergence of China as a major power. Just to give you an example, in 1990, the economy of Russia and China were the same. Now China is over 10 times larger. So you start seeing the emergence of the others, organizations such as the BRICS, of which India is a member. So the world became much messier. Multilateral institutions, at least on a global level, were not reformed, and suddenly we have a multipolar world where interests start being in the driver's seat rather than the containment of those interests. And suddenly we live in a sort of a world which is quite messy. Then, of course, we start seeing the emergence of others, like India. I'm now standing here in a country which has 7% growth rates, which is the biggest democracy in the world. I was here last in 2013 in both New Delhi and Mumbai, and you can see the change in your eyes, and you can see the basic optimism, I think, of the country, and you can see that the largest democracy in the world is going to become one of the biggest players on the global scene. So we suddenly live in a multipolar world. And I think, for me, the sort of turning point, as I said, was in February 2022, when there was a feeling that through the notion of might is right, another country is able, of scale I mean, like Russia, to try to invade a country like Ukraine. And this has then been accelerated with the new US administration. So my first point is that we now live in a multipolar disorder where power vacuums emerge and someone is always going to fill them. And it will take at least 5 years for the order to settle. And the big question is, who tries to settle it and where will it settle? The aim in the First World War aftermath was the League of Nations, not strong enough. After World War II, the United Nations, strong enough to contain world wars. After the Cold War, not enough revision. So the question is, what do we do next? And I'll try to give you an answer in my conclusions. My second point is the balance of the world. In the book and elsewhere, I talk about a triangle of power. And the triangle of power is, of course, a simplification because the world is not clear-cut and not a triangle, I guess literally. But the triangle is the global West, the global East, and the global South. Now, what do I mean? The global West, for me, at least in the book, was a group of roughly 50 countries led by the United States, included Europe, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia, and others who believed in the liberal world order that had been created after World War II. Now, of course, the jury is out, or perhaps the jury has already decided that the United States doesn't exactly support the old liberal world order, that the politics of the United States is ideologically based on MAGA, which is anti-globalism, anti-global institutions, anti-European Union, and in terms of policy is based on America First, which has a pecking order. Number 1 is the Western Hemisphere, number 2 is the Indo-Pacific, number 3 is Europe, number 4 is the Middle East, and number 5 is Africa. So perhaps if I were to frame the thesis of my book again, I would call it the rectangle of power instead. But it's too late for that, and I think the sequel will have to follow this new pattern. Having said all of that, the global West is now probably a little bit smaller, but the basic thesis still holds. It wants to preserve the liberal international order, including the UN, the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank, the institutions that were created after World War II. On the opposite side, we have the global East. Again, a simplification, roughly 25 countries led by China, followed nowadays certainly by Russia, and countries that quite often vote together with them in the United Nations. And probably the thesis of this group is not so much the multilateral liberal order, but a new multipolar order, where obviously the nation state is supreme, national sovereignty rules, and we share sovereignty or divide sovereignty only to a certain point. But you cannot tell what another country does. My big thesis in the book that the global South, which of course I unfairly put 125 countries together, which is not a geographic conglomeration, but a historical conglomeration, many of them formerly non-aligned states, many of them formerly developing countries, many of them felt that they were not a part of the liberal world order. My argument in the book and here is that it's going to be the global South that decides what the next world order looks like. Is it going to be multipolar, a la East, or is it going to be multilateral, a la West? And within the global South, you have leading nations, probably one above all, which is India. You have countries such as Indonesia. You have the Gulf region. You have Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, South Africa. You have Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, many countries that are actually in G20 that will tilt the balance. They're, of course, not a unified group, much like the global West is not unified, much like the global East is not unified, but at least it gives you a framework of thinking. But the big thinking is that it's going to be the global South that decides. And before I come to my conclusion, going from order to balance, I'll now say a few words about the dynamics. In other words, in the next 5 years, what are the things that are going to drive the merging order and the merging balance. And I would argue once again that there are three things. The first one is competition, the second one is conflict, and the third one is cooperation. So what do I mean by competition? I think all the 200 nation states of the world are in some kind of a competitive structure. So we compete about who has the best technology. And India is pushing itself, of course, very hard on this front. Other competitors being the United States, China, and of course, Europe. Secondly, there's always economic competition. And there, a country like Finland with under 1% growth rates is going to lose hands down to a country like India, which is growing at 7% per annum, because you have demography and economy on your side, and because the level of development is so much faster than what we have and any other country in Europe for that matter. And the third form of competition, which we can see emerging now, is military. My problem, I'm not against competition. I think competition is actually quite good. But the problem is that if you don't contain competition in multilateral institutions, or if you don't have rules, what happens is you drop to the second fallacy, and that is conflict. Now, after the Cold War, a lot of the conflicts were local, so kind of wars of independence or regional or inside civil wars. Then now the conflicts are becoming regional. We saw that with Russia attacking Ukraine, Israel and Palestine. We've seen it in Sudan, but now we see it in the past 7 days, of course, in what you call West Asia and we call the Middle East, where Israel's and the US's attack on Iran has led to an escalation where you have missiles flying in 13 countries, including Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Cyprus, outside what we traditionally call West Asia. And what we now need to do is to contain and make sure that this competition slash conflict doesn't go from local to regional and then to global. And that's what we are fighting about. And here's where I come to my third dynamic, which is cooperation, which is very easily understood in a country like India, which is a cooperative country, which has a very realistic foreign policy and which is able to have diplomatic and other dialogue with the rest of the world. And my argument is that we need to contain the competition so it doesn't spill over into conflict in multilateral institutions. We can now see what naked multipolarity means. It means that there are power vacuums, and it means that someone fills those power vacuums. It means that countries start working outside the framework of international law, when there's no multilateral mediator such as the United Nations. And of course, this cooperation, it can be bilateral. I don't have a problem with that countries like Finland and India form bilateral agreements. I don't have a problem with plurilateral agreements. I don't have a problem with regional agreements or regional integration. It's actually a good breeding ground for the most important, which is multilateral cooperation. And now I'll come to my conclusion before the questions. My conclusion is that right now in 2026, I think we have pretty much three scenarios that we're looking at for the next 5 years. The first scenario is what we see now. In other words, a transition of the old world order and a continued disorder, which is not a complete rupture or a collapse or a death of the old system and the institutions that we used to rely on. But it is a world where you see deals, where you see transactions, and it is a world which is unstable. That is what we are seeing right now. The second scenario is a worse one, and that's a collapse or a total rupture or destruction of the old world order. And this would mean it's a collapse to chaos. And in my mind, it means a breakdown of the old system. It means a system of what I call strongman rule, of predatory hegemons, of spheres of interests, of warlords. It is, of course, the scariest scenario in the sense that power goes unhinged, completely uncontrolled. And therefore, I hope we can go to scenario number 3, and that is a rebalancing of the liberal world order. And for me, that means reform of the system. That is why I have now for 2 years called for reform of the UN Security Council with 2 seats for Asia, 2 seats for Africa, and 1 seat for Latin America. And for self-evident reasons, one of those seats in Asia should be with India. Why do I say this? Because the UN Security Council reflects the world as it was in 1945 or 1975. It doesn't reflect the world as it is or was in 2025. And my argument is that if you want the multilateral world order to survive, you need to give agency for those players that for population, economy, development, technology, or other reasons should hold that power of decision making. I think the same actually goes for the financial institutions of the WTO, the IMF, and the World Bank. And there's a reason I called for a new San Francisco moment, which created the UN in 1945. I want a New Delhi moment. I can't say New Delhi moment, but New Delhi moment to reform the institutions as they stand. And I'll conclude by saying I think we need to do serious reflecting on the order, the balance, and the dynamics of the world. I think this is the 1918, 1945, 1989 moment of our generation. And to come back where you started from, you'll know that Finland, for the 8th year running, is the happiest country in the world. But India is actually the most optimistic country in the world. So what I think we need to have in our reflection of the new world order is, of course, realism, but a little bit of optimism and a little bit of happiness. That's how we'll get there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, for that wonderful speech. I am sure that after such an insightful speech, many of these students will soon pick up your recent book, Triangle of Power, and will read through it and will come back to you about it.
I think they'll probably go to ChatGPT and just ask for a summary.
That's a good one. You know, your witty one-liners have been a hit in Delhi as well. So, you know, you have started on a very contemplative note, introspecting about what your understanding of the world order was and how it was Europe-centric and how it has evolved over the years. You've also emphasized on the importance of global south, calling the current churn that we are in the midst of a multipolar world and saying that it will be the global south which will be empowered to decide whether the world order moves to a more multilateral world. I want to understand, what do you think are the factors which will help or enable the global south to take that lead to decide which way the world order goes? Because we are literally in the midst of a churn right now.
Yeah, let me begin by 2 observations that I got from yesterday's book talk at Raisina. And I think one of them came from an Iranian scholar, or Iranian-American scholar, Vali, and the other one came from Jai Shankar. The first one was, are we actually back to a unipolar moment where the United States is basically driving the agenda of world politics, whether it's Venezuela, Cuba, whether it's Iran, whether it's Israel, Palestine, whether it's Sudan, etc., etc. And I think it's a valid question. The second observation I wanted to make was that yesterday, more than ever, I understood why when I look at the past, the present, and the future. Jai Shankar was really good. He said, Alex, on the past, I think your historical analysis is very Western, and I take that point. You know, the dates that I give, 1845, 89, they are Western dates because it was a Western-dominated order. But then he said, but I really like your analysis of the present, and because I call for the global South to take the lead, I said, that's great. You know, we're gonna do it. So what's going to drive it? I think reality. Reality in the sense that you have demography on your side. Reality in the sense that your pace of development is going to be exponentially faster than you know, what we will have, no matter what kind of technological revolutions we have. And also the fact that nowadays we are not so, I mean, of course we are dependent on raw materials, but at the end of the day, technology is such a strong instrument that countries can actually accelerate the pace at which they're developing, and that's where countries like India come into play. So I know that you study AI here, you study quantum computing and many other things as well, and I think that kind of gives us infinite opportunities. My personal take is that the combination of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, robotics, and especially biotech, that will change the way in which we work and the economy. It'll change politics and the way in which we communicate. It will change war and the way in which we conduct it. It will change academia and the way in which you teach. And finally, it'll change science and the way in which we are as human beings. And if we're moving towards a general artificial intelligence, say in 3 to 5 years, this is, I think, an opportunity not only for the global West, East, or even global North, but especially for the global South. So that's why I think if I had to invest somewhere right now, it would be more in the global South.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Before opening the floor for the students' questions, I want to ask you, you have traveled from the national capital of the country to the financial capital of the country. We are sitting in Mumbai, and you spoke about, you know, bioeconomy. We hear a lot about the circular economy. There's clean tech, there's health and well-being. You spoke of digitization. How do you see economic collaborations, especially at a time when the bilateral ties between the countries have been upgraded now, when you and the Prime Minister declared that? You know, financially, how do you see it happening?
Just on a lighter note on the circular economy, you know, it was a little bit scary driving around in New Delhi because they had these huge sort of postures of my face, right? It's not nice. I mean, it's really nice that they're there, but there were so many, so I hope they become a part of the circular economy after I leave, that they are sort of recycled and, you know, used for energy or something like that. Having said that, I think the frame of India's relationship with Finland is now in the free trade agreement between the European Union and India. And I think if you look at the big picture, this is kind of a marriage made in heaven, in the sense that we are values allies. You have a growing economy, we have an infrastructure, so the fact that we have a free trade agreement now will accelerate the relationship that we have. And then, of course, on you know, Finland and India, I mean, I can't speak for you, but for our side, I would point out to 3 sort of tech issues that we can probably work on together. One is networks. I think the students here probably never had Nokia phones, but us older ones did. But you probably don't know that Nokia empowers about 50% of your mobile network. So we have trustworthy network systems. Secondly, we're really good at quantum, which you mentioned. We have 2 of the top 10 quantum companies in the world in the form of IQM and Bluefos. And of course, quantum is the one that gives you the infrastructure for artificial intelligence. So there is an area where we can cooperate and where India is strong as well. And then the third one is actually satellites. I'm here with 2 satellite companies from Finland. One is called ICE-I and the other one is called Reorbit. Actually has an Indian founder and CEO, but based in Finland. And I think if we sort of combine these things and put it in a melting pot, I think we'll do a lot of great things together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. With this, I open the floor for questions. If the students can please ask their questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, and I hope my city, Mumbai, is treating you well. Sir, India often believes, my name is Amuganan Khataukar, and I am an electronics and telecommunications student from VESIT, University of Mumbai. Sir, India believes in the policy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that the world is...
In the policy of what?
In the policy, it is a Sanskrit term, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that the world is a family, despite all the divisions and all. So, sir, my question is, Finland is very ahead in terms of the quantum computing, like you said, in the field of electronics and telecommunication as well, since I'm a student, so I've researched a bit about that. So, sir, in an age where geopolitics is worsening globally, so how can countries who are technologically advanced, like Finland, help the underprivileged sections of the society and help the underprivileged countries in terms of technology in the scenario where the situation is worsening globally?
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. It's a really good question. I'll start by saying that one of the things that I keep on promoting, and I did it in my speech in Raisina as well, I talked about dignified foreign policy. Of course, it's quite easy for me to say, you know, I come from a small country, we don't have a colonial past, I don't feel that we have ever behaved aggressively toward anyone. We have fought for our independence, our sovereignty, and our territorial integrity without making any further acquisition. So my take is very egalitarian on this. The reason I have the thesis about the Global South is, of course, a little bit self-interested in the sense that I know that you guys hold the future. But the second one is that I believe very much in the philosophy which you just mentioned, which I can't repeat because it sounded like a very complicated world, but the idea that we are a global family. And right now, unfortunately, I see, due to technology, that this global family is becoming extremely polarized. I don't think our brains have gotten used to technology yet. And I'm not only talking about the dopamine that we keep on getting through our phones when we scroll on Instagram. Oh, by the way, did you hear I had 12 million views, kind of a thing. But it's basically about us not being able to contain the language that we use against each other. So it'll take a little while, I think, for our brains to get used to this. But after this, we have to start dispersing technology more evenly. And my slight worry right now is that we're kind of starting to see a splinter net. So instead of, you know, having open platforms, instead of sharing the information, and even if I may, sharing the IP, we start looking inwards. And I think this is a problem. This is not going to solve our thinking on, you know, how to work with tech, because I actually think that India is more tech savvy than Finland, and you will exponentially become more tech savvy. So we can't teach much, except that we can get together and look at the best practices and work on that side. But just a final point here, because you know, your lives are going to be very different from my generation. You are a tech generation. And my big worry with artificial intelligence is that it's the first technology that actually has agency. You know, a computer or a phone doesn't have agency, but this one does. And my final point on this, what can we do globally? We should follow what Prime Minister Modi said, that we need to share it with everyone, and not only share it, we need to have common rules on what the limits of AI are going to be. Because the big problem right now is that the big tech companies, they don't think for the common good anymore. You know, it used to be in the olden days that quite often they did. You know, they worked with governments. Now they think they are the government, and I think this is a risk.
Hello. Good morning, Mr. President. I'm Shivansh Mishra from NSS unit of Saraswati College. And sir, nowadays we see that many countries in Global South feel underrepresented in global decision-making structures. And we talked about multilateral platforms. So my question is, what steps can we take to make these multilateral platforms more equitable and free for all? Thank you so much.
Good. Thanks for allowing me to repeat the thesis of my book and give you the concrete examples. I think kind of two steps, and I explored a little bit in the book, and I did in my speech in Raisina as well 2 days ago. So I think the first step is that we need to be stronger on regional integration, because regional integration is actually a lab for global integration. And I say this from experience. I mean, you know, we can have many thoughts about European integration and its level, but it is quite an extraordinary, you know, test case for international relations, where you pool sovereignty on trade, you pool sovereignty on competition, on customs, and even money. You know, we don't have a Finnish currency anymore. It's the euro, and the monetary policy is basically set by the European Central Bank. So do something regionally. And of course, there are many different regional conglomerations. It's a little bit more complicated for a big country like India. It's a little bit more complicated for a big country like China. But for smaller players which are in ASEAN or which are in Mercosur in Latin America, or of course then the African Union on the African continent, it's a good springboard. The second thing that we do is reform. And I think the 4 key institutions that we need to reform, where we need to have a more equitable balance of power and decision making, is the UN. Therefore, my suggestion on the UN Security Council is the WTO, is the IMF, and is the World Bank. Because they are the ones who set the rules of politics and peace and finance and money. So if we get that sort of right, I think it would be good. And that's why I've suggested that we need to have this New Delhi moment and, you know, get world leaders together. Of course, the pushback that I get on the idea is, Alex, it's unrealistic, you know, the big guys are never going to allow it to happen, etc., etc. Well, that was probably the same narrative that we got in 1945, the San Francisco moment. You know, why would the victors of World War II want to pool sovereignty and power and allow others to decide? Okay, well, then you come up with a system of veto power. But at least then we have diplomatic solutions. We're trying to find common solutions to common problems. You know, we deal with conflicts, we deal with tech, and we deal with climate change. Because if we don't contain climate change globally, you know, all hell will break loose.
Good morning, sir. I'm Manasvi Sulakhe, an artificial intelligence and data science student from VES. So my question was that in our rapidly globalizing world, how does Finland preserve its cultural tradition and identity while also embracing the international influence and diversity?
Great. Thanks a lot. A really good question. The starting point is that you have to understand that we are, by definition, a rather young nation. We gained our independence in 1917. Before that, for 700 years, we had been a part of Sweden, and from 1809 to 1917, we were part of the Russian Empire. What did we do then, and what do we do now? Cultural identity is based on language. It's based on history. It's based on education. It's based on civilization. It's based on traditions. It's based on norms. So what we wanted to do then, before independence, is to highlight what is Finnish. But the thing is that the sort of line between nationalism and patriotism is very fine. So I call us a patriotic nation, but not a nationalistic nation. And for us right now, patriotism also means that we don't only turn inwards and cooperate among ourselves and think that we are the only happy nation in the world, but we cooperate with others. We're willing to share and pool sovereignty with our Nordic friends, with our European friends, with our transatlantic friends, and with the globe in general. So this is the mentality and the approach. So for me, Finnish nationhood and identity is not either or. I'm a Finn to the core. But at the same time, I know that Finland lives and breathes internationalism. And I think if everyone would work in this direction, we would be able to solve a lot of things. Final point. One of the big problems that I find in nationhood and in politics is this eternal belief that one is always right. And when you're always right, you start defending the fact that you're always right. and then suddenly you are in a completely polarized situation and you can't get out. Why don't we think a little bit more academically that an opposite view is an interesting avenue to understanding something? The problem here is that tech feeds us a lot of information, but information is not wisdom. Wisdom comes from the fact that you're able to siphon that information and listen to the other side. And that, at least for me, is part of Finnish identity.
That's a wonderful point, especially because, you know, we are a diverse country, and there are often points that are raised by academics, criticism saying that, you know, not one nation, but you are sub-nationalities being put together. So in that perspective, to have your answer was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. Yes?
Good morning, sir. My name is Ajay Yadav, and I am from RJ College, Ghatkopar. Sir, my question is, with the rise of economic nationalism, trade wars, supply chain disruptions, is the world economic is moving towards a regional economic bloc instead of global economic integration? What implementation does this have for developing countries?
Right, really, really good question. So I think it's a pendulum. Do you remember when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Cold War ended, and kind of capitalism won, right? Then the idea was market, market, market. Get the state out of everything. We don't need it. You know, it's just an impediment. We need real competition. We need real competition policy. We need to distribute our values change. You know, we need to be able to do free trade all around the world. Now, unfortunately, just like you alluded, the pendulum has swung to, no, it's state, state, state. And I think this sort of trend started for two reasons. One was that in the world that was seen to live by capitalistic norms or free trade norms, the assumption was that we would be able to allocate those resources and distribute wealth in a justifiable manner. But suddenly a lot of people felt left out. I'll give you an example. I was in a debate about Brexit in London right after it had happened. And a British MP stood up and said, "Why did we leave the European Union? Our GDP has grown X, Y, and Z since 1973. Someone stood up from the audience spontaneously and said, "Yeah, mate, perhaps your GDP, but not mine." So the point is that there was this feeling that perhaps capitalism wasn't, you know, because not every country is a welfare society. It wasn't distributed well. The second reason was actually COVID. When suddenly we realized that, whoops, you know, value chains linked to pharmaceuticals or values chains linked to critical minerals which feed our technological infrastructure were stopped on the borders because of a pandemic. And probably the third reason was the war in Ukraine, in the sense that we saw disruptions to energy value chains, we saw disruptions to food value chains, and we saw disruptions to fertilizer value chains. So how do we solve this? We solve it by getting back around the table and having common rules on how things would be set. We should not throw the baby away with the bathwater. We should try to find a balance. My final point on this, when it comes to globalization and sort of free trade and capitalism, whatever you're going, it always needs to be balanced out, but by a fair system of distribution and wealth. The reason why we're seeing at least relative stability in countries, say in the Gulf region, is because they've been able to accumulate wealth and then distribute it, even though they're not democracies. The reason we're seeing stability in India is because you have growth rates and you're trying to stabilize it. When I see 250 million people eradicated from poverty in 10 years, there is a message there. When I see people having bank accounts, there's a message that the system works. So it's always extremely complex, but I think we should get away from the idea that we're going to close borders and cut value chains and keep everything at home, because that, for me, is an illusion. It's utopia. We're not going to be able to do that.
Good morning, sir. Myself, Sanakeval Ramani, and I'm from VESIT, Mumbai University. So my question was, as we all know, Finland is known for sustainable living. So how does everyday lifestyle encourage people for environmental responsibilities?
Okay, thanks. I think it's a really good question because even in my rhetoric, I often talk about climate change as a global problem which needs a global solution. The truth is, it's a global problem, but a lot of the solutions are actually going to be local. So what you do is you set global standards and levels, and then after that you try to invest in technology, and then finally you get innovation which will lead toward a more sustainable system. Because the truth is that our consumption of energy is not going to go down. It's actually going to go up. So it's a question of how we can generate clean energy or clean electricity. Now, a country like Finland, we have a very diverse energy portfolio. Of course, our climate conditions are quite different from India. We can go from -20 to +30, or even from -30 to +30 within the span of 12 months. So what we did a long time ago was to invest not only in renewables and hydro, but also in nuclear power, which is clean energy. But we always had a mix also of gas and of oil in the system. And then we come to the consumption issue and us as individuals. You know, we are of course only a small particle in the cycle of the universe. But of course we have an impact, and of course our personal behaviors and patterns matter. And how do you deal with it? I think it's a very individual thing. And my approach to it is that I am not going to give you advice on how you live your day-to-day life. You take those decisions completely individually. And if and when our values are the same and you and I are afraid of climate change, then we understand that some things have to be made. It could be about the circular economy. It could be about the way in which we consume electricity or heat. In my case, I can give no moral judgment to anyone about travel because I travel the world all the time, which of course is not a sustainable way of living life. But I think a lot of Finns understand the necessity of fighting climate change and take sustainable decisions. But this also, when it comes to the global south, because I'm here, I can't come from the global north and say, listen, Europe only emits 6 to 7% of CO2 in the world, and Finland only a tiny bit, so you better do the same. That's not going to be my message. You have to decide it yourself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, you know, since we have such a young and engaged population, and there's one aspect that hasn't really been a part of this communication is, you know, the kind of fitness freak that you are. The audience doesn't know probably, but he's an accomplished high-level Ironman triathlete who has taken under 10 hours to win his titles in his age group. So today, sitting in front of a young population in a city which hosts marathons, what is your fitness mantra or message to these youngsters?
Okay, I think I have to be careful. I'll give you two, because are we approaching our end? Was that the message? Not net 7, good. Then I'll give you two quick answers. So the first one is I firmly believe in the balance between body and mind, which means that I try to take care of both and nurture both. It has nothing to do with looks or body composure. We're all very different. But it has to do with your general well-being. So if I feel physically unwell, say in an extreme case, I'm sick, I don't feel mentally strong. If I feel physically fit, it feeds my brain. And then there are a few things that you can do to sort of feed that. Number one is I have a philosophy of 1 hour of exercise gives you 2 more hours of energy every day. And I end up doing my exercise in the morning. So, you know, I run, I swim, I bike, or I go to the gym, whatever is available, or I go skiing, whatever is possible for the schedule. But everyone finds their own way. And there's nothing wrong in having a 1 hour walk. There's nothing wrong in dancing for 1 hour. So, you know, you have so many ways of doing it, but for me, it makes me feel good and it gives me certain energy levels. The second thing I do is I try to sleep enough. And I think that's something that is always underestimated. Scientifically, we have not studied the patterns of sleep for long enough. But all of these people who say that, oh, I'm working so hard, they only sleep 4 hours, I think that's BS. And it's not sustainable. If you do that, you're going to end up with dementia and Alzheimer's, and you're going to burn out. So remember to try to sleep 8 hours. Not always possible, but you should try. And then the third thing I do is nutrition. So I try to live by a standard that I, you know, eat 10% crap and 90% good stuff. And on the good stuff, I mean Indian food. So I try to keep that balance. And then on the mental side, I try to learn something all the time, because I think that both the physical and mental are equally important. That's why I began by saying, please stay curious, have an open mind, keep on reading. I try to read a lot because I even though I forget what I read, I know it sort of goes somewhere in my hard drive in the brain. And finding a balance, but have mercy on yourself, you know. It's not every day is going to be perfect, not every week is going to be perfect, but just to have these sort of habits, I think usually works for me.
Thank you so much for this, and thank you all for your kind attention. Mr. President, you've been really kind, and you've given, you know, yes, if I may, you know, just thank everyone here, the Consulate General of Finland and the Mumbai University for such a fantastic program, all the dignitaries for being here on a Saturday morning, and all the students to be here on a weekend and to be engaged in such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Can I leave you with a thought which I was engraved to be by my parents, and which I have ingrained also to our children who are now 24 and 22. And it's kind of 4 things that I want you to take away as young students. So I'm not looking at you guys here in the front. And they are saying that which is dream, believe, work hard, succeed. And by these 4 things, I mean, dream is something that all of us should have. You should dream big. There's nothing wrong with having a vision, with having aspirations, with having goals. Realize that not all of those dreams are going to be fulfilled, but have that dream of what you want to do in life and what you want to be. Don't let anyone put you down on that. Don't let anyone tell you that, that's completely out of order. Second, believe. And here I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about self-belief. I think in today's world, when you have so many impulses coming from all kinds of different directions, quite often trying to put you down about the way you look or the way you think or the way you say, don't allow that to bring you down. You always have to believe in yourself. Because if you don't believe in yourself, no one else will either. My third piece of advice is work hard. I've never met anyone in life who hasn't worked hard who has gone places. Now, working hard doesn't mean that it's complete excess, that you study through the night and you don't do anything else that's serious. Life is much more than just work. But keep that balance and remember that sometimes you have to grind. There are going to be uncomfortable moments in your life where you're pushed to the limits, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. My final and most important message, and fourth message, is succeed. And by success, I do not mean societal status. I do not mean a title. I do not mean wealth. For me, and especially for all of you students, success is defined through meaning. Do you live a meaningful life? And you define that meaning yourself. I hope that that meaning is not just wealth. I hope that that meaning is not being a professor or being a president. But the meaning comes from the fact that you do something in your day-to-day life which has an impact, which you believe is important. And if you do that, I think, again, we come back to the notion, then you'll end up living a happy life. But don't be too hard on yourself. Things happen in life which feel uncomfortable, but you always have to see through it and move on. Therefore, dream, believe, work hard, and succeed. Thank you very much.